So, hi, Carrie. Thank you so much for joining us on the Next Online podcast. We're very excited to have you on as our next guest. Now, before we get into everything today, I want you to tell the audience a little bit about yourself, kind of walk them through the journey, and tell us how you got into the contingent workforce space.
Yeah, I don't think anyone goes to school for contingent workforce, right? But thank you so much for having me. My name's Carrie. I work at Lyft. Been here for about 2 years. Been in the contingent labor space for I don't know, at least 10 at this point, maybe more. I first went to school actually or college for apparel merchandising and management, thinking I was going to be some really cool buyer in New York. I just wasn't going to be a buyer of clothes. Now a buyer, in technology and,
Yeah.
consumer workforce space. So I started off as a retail manager in operations. Worked at a couple different stores like Target, Victoria's Secret, and I really liked the people hiring aspect of those roles. I just didn't really like the late night hours and the overnights and what have you within retail. So I got into recruiting, went into the recruiting world on the staffing side for a few years, moved my way over to more of an operational on-site manager role at Apple, supporting a really big team for Apple Maps, and then was really wanting to get onto the client side. So I went to the MSP side first, kind of was in that in-between stage for a few years, managing both the suppliers and the client, and then got the opportunity in my last role at Cruise to be on the program side. But now being at Lyft, running my own program for the very first time, getting to do a lot of things that I've learned over the years, things that I loved and things that I didn't love. So it's been a really big career step in this role that I'm in today, doing things the way I think that they're best to be done.
That's amazing. What an incredible journey. And I know that throughout our conversations, we've talked about, or you've mentioned to me, honestly, that there's a disconnect at times between, staffing partners, MSP buyers, and consultants within the contingent workforce industry. Now, what is that gap and why does it matter so much right now in today's current state?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much on this topic, but my couple of things that come to mind. There's a lot of competition, right? Between staffing partners, MSP partners, VMS partners. It's like who can do it the best, who could do it the fastest.
Yeah.
There's so many different aspects of it. And I think a lot of the time we lose leverage on doing it all together. We have a lot of these things like, for instance, a conference, right? We're going to ProcureCon next week. And you go to those events and you're talking to like-minded people, like, a staffing account manager versus another account manager. I'm in a conversation with both of them. They do the same thing, on the daily basis, but then they do it in a different way. And I love sitting in the conversation, like, so how do you do it? And how do you do it? And they're like, well, I'm not going to share my secrets. Well, but why not? Like, really, you're not breaking these boundaries of like something that's like so cutting edge or
Yeah.
something that's so new, right? Everyone does it in a similar aspect. And a lot of the time people I feel like walk away as like, man, I'm glad that, they feel the same, especially in the last year with, AI coming and all of the things. I think
Yes.
it's been even more interesting seeing people like kind of fetch others that are in the similar roles and but potentially a different company, even a competing company where, they're saying like, so what are you doing? Like what are the things that are still getting you business? And for me as a buyer, I feel that even more, right? Like there's so many suppliers, all like staffing partners, MSPs, VMSs that come to me all the time and are like, hey, like I need your business. Like, just give me a chance. And I'm like, I can't give everyone a chance. I would love to give everyone a chance if I could, but I just physically cannot. I don't need 600 suppliers. My group isn't that big. And it's trying to figure out who is the best of the best or who is doing things differently. So I think the last like 6 months have been very eye-opening for me, really taking a deep dive with some of our current suppliers in my program and just understanding how they're doing things. What are they thinking about AI? How are they changing their operations? How do they operate? Do they have, people here in the US? Do they have people somewhere offshore?
Yeah.
What do they think of me as a size program versus, my friend over at Uber or something, right? Like, we're definitely different. And so how do they prioritize me versus a different client? What will help them prioritize me? Like, I need to give them more information? Do I need to have better conversations? Do I need to allow them to talk to hiring managers more? Like, what is it that will get me as a buyer the best service from them as well? And so that's one thing I think that I've been, really, really focused on. And then helping people that are maybe in like a more junior role at any of those stages, right? I take a lot of pride, I think, in, or not, I think I do take a lot of pride in when people reach out to me and are asking, what should I do in my career? Or I like what you've done in your path.
Yeah.
And I always like having those conversations because I haven't done it perfect and I learn something new like literally every day. But I think it's really important to be curious, right? I said this at a panelist that I did about a month ago, like be the youngest in the room.
Yes.
Not like age-wise, like that, I mean, yes, that's good too, right? Because if there's people older in the room, they probably have been through more things. But, like, skill set-wise, like, be the one that doesn't know the skill, you're learning it. Be the one that is the most curious, the one that's gonna ask the questions, like, I think it's so important if you're not that person that's youngest in the room, you're probably in the wrong room because you probably think you know it all, right? And I don't think anyone actually knows it all.
Exactly. So I want to make two comments on the things that you just told me right now. One, I wanted to ask, so when you're determining as a buyer, like who to go with, what kind of makes them stand out? In the way I know there was a ton of questions that you kind of go through internally to figure that out. But when you find someone that you like, okay, what makes you take that next step? If that makes sense.
So I will say like something that I've learned in the last year, because I did a big supplier optimization about a year and a half year ago. And then there's been some suppliers that just haven't made the cut. And now thinking of some of the suppliers I've added more recently and why I've added them, it's changed a little bit.
Yeah.
The learning that I did is even like I might know one person at a supplier. I might know the CEO, the, VP of sales, the operations manager, right? And that might have been my past or previous reason to bring that supplier on of like, I know that they're awesome. They like, I know their, thought process. I know like how they like to recruit or, I know that they're a hard worker and that they're going to do anything I ask them to do. But I think now it's about knowing the team. The CEO, maybe, right? Like, depending on how big the staffing company is or the VMS company is. But then knowing the salesperson, sure. Like, but I might not have to work with the salesperson once I sign that MSA. They're going to say, see you later. Not
Yeah.
usually, but for the most part, they're like, that's their job is to get the MSA signed. Okay, so who's my delivery manager? Who's the person that's going to be talking to my MSP? That's really, really important to me. And I think that was one of the really big things for me. We recently started implementing a new VMS, Connexus. And that was a big factor for me because when I did the RFP, I met their whole team I was going to work with. I knew John, the CEO, and I knew he was going to give me his, good people, if you will, or, I mean, everyone's probably good in his mind because he's hired them. But, they did a very good job to understand, like, I'm going to meet their whole family, right? Their whole family within their supplier portal or supplier partnership. And that's really important. I think that's something that I will continue now to push for and make sure that I don't just know the one person because, that one salesperson that I might be great friends with and know that are hard workers, they might leave to the next staffing partner. And then I'm like, okay, great. I have this staffing partner that I don't know anyone else now. And like once they leave, it's goes to who, right? And like,
Yeah.
how's that partnership? Are they going to give me the support I've been asking for? I think that's one of my big, big learnings in the last probably 6 to 12 months, even.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense too, because at the end of the day, you make a good point there. Like, the person you meet originally may not even be assigned to that specific, let's say your account, right? So you got to make sure you also meet everyone that could be the supporting cast almost of
Yeah.
these partnerships.
And I even think too, like, I have Brian on my team internally here at Lyft. I have my MSP team, my
Yeah,
program manager and operations team. I'm like, it's even important for them to meet them before I bring somebody new on. Do they like them? Do they get along? Do they understand each other's like models and ability to work together? Because that's another part of it, right? Like I could bring this awesome supplier on, but then I'm going to talk to them maybe like once in a blue moon or when things are hitting the fan, right? Like my team is the one who's operating with them day in, day out, going on intake calls, getting resumes from, making sure offers are accepted. But if they don't have a great connection, then what
that's
is the connection that I built to begin with, right? Really
yeah.
mean. So I think that's been a really big like eye opener, I think, in the last few months.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then my second thing I wanted to touch upon was how you said you want to help, more junior level people or just being like that youngest in the room, not even just age wise, but like you said, just
I know,
skills.
I need to think of a different way of saying that, but it's just
But I
that's
totally get you when you said that, and I loved it because it honestly, it's super on theme, with the
yeah.
podcast, constantly paying it forward in your day-to-day as well, which is something that we're very passionate about over here, so I just wanted to call it out for everyone who's gonna be listening in, like, you're always paying it forward, so that's very exciting to hear.
I really do try, and it's so funny, like, I get a little bit of, like, I don't know, excitement, or I'm like, "Oh, man, yeah, I did good," like, I'll leave names out, but there was somebody, point 1, asked me to help somebody else get a job, or did I know of anything? I talked to that person, then I talked to, 3 other people and said, "Hey, do you have a job?" I go back and they're like, "Hey, I think they're interviewing." "How did you know that?" I'm like, "'Cause I talk to people and I like to help people out," right? It was just eye-opening. I was like, I feel connected, right? I feel like the 2, 3, maybe 30-minute conversations that I had, somebody then got a job. Maybe not just because of me, right? Their awesomeness is their own awesomeness as it is, but I helped it in some way because I had the conversation. I said I knew them. I backed them up. I helped them make sure that they were making a good decision for their career path as well. I value that like so much. Whether I have to work with that person ever, who knows, right? Like might not even be a supplier that you
Yeah.
know, I'm working with here at Lyft, but I still feel like that can go a long way. And one, because our industry is so small, it's a full circle. I'll eventually have some direct connection with that person,
Yeah.
right? And then it will just go that much farther for when they need to work hard for me, right? Because they got this cool job, you know?
Yeah, you literally never know who's connected to who, and it's honestly very fulfilling as well, especially because, like, the contingent workforce space is very people first, so it makes sense, right? Like,
Yeah.
as to why we tend to pay it forward in that space, which is something that I always love. So I just had to hit on that. And then I know that you often, emphasize that it's not just executives or frontline consultants, but it's the middle of the ecosystem that really needs more education and clarity throughout the space. So who makes up that middle layer and what are they missing today?
Yeah. So I think of like all the people that like we see at conferences. Those are your like again, your CEOs, your VPs, your senior VPs, your directors. But behind that group, there's program managers, account managers, recruiters, delivery teams that don't get to see and interact in that capacity a lot of the time, but they're doing the daily work, in my opinion, right? And so I think that there's definitely a gap, and I think as we continue to have more AI influence, in the next years, we're gonna have a bigger gap there, right? How do those younger generations and individuals learn the skills that some of these others get because they're in the communities and they're in those conference settings potentially or in the room settings with others that they're learning from. And why I even say that is I think of myself like 5 years ago. I wasn't going to conferences. I wasn't doing this. And like the gap between that, like what I know today versus even like today is to me is like exponential. And so it's really about how do we influence and educate some of those people so that way when, you know, they're in those roles, account manager, program manager, how do we give them the tools and the ideas of how they could learn as quickly as they can, if they want to, of course, to get to that end result or to that futuristic career goal. They don't have some of the conversation opportunities that others may have. And so how do we as the leaders, program teams and VPs and CEOs, how do we make sure that we're giving that information back to our younger, if you will, generations, but our younger selves, really,
Yeah.
right? Like we were there once upon a time because if not, then they're only hurting you at the end of the day, right? They're not serving to their best ability if they don't have the education, skills, information to do their best job.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that it's like almost like this continuous learning loop, right? Feeding back the information to the younger professionals that are maybe entering the industry, or even those that are like you said, like still learning throughout their career, like the middle people that are there on the front lines, on the ground, doing the work on the day to day. Like they're still learning just as much as CEOs learning, people below them. I think it's all about continuous information, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fully in the loop, keep it going. Because even with the AI stuff now, there's a lot of people that say, okay, like we're going to be relying on AI. I think there's always going to be a constant human in the loop when it comes to it. Because at the end of the day, that's how the real information, the real experience are just going to be fed to those people, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's just yeah, there's so many mentors that I have in my own, circle, if you will, that I value so much about like the things that they teach me. They didn't have AI back then. Some of them, they always will joke of getting faxed resumes, and it's
Yes.
like, but what were the things like in our younger generation doesn't even know what a fax machine is, right? But I think it's really important to just understand like, okay, so how did you get from there to here? And asking those probing questions to them of like, what did you learn? How did you learn it? Who did you reach out to? Who did you connect with? Who is your mentor? Making sure I'm asking them those probing questions for me to get to a place where they are 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that another thing is, the contingent workforce programs aren't what they used to be, especially now. How have they changed over the last decade? And what's the biggest misconceptions leaders still have about managing them effectively?
Yeah, that's a very robust question. I think contingent programs have changed over time. We have a lot more learning, like, certifications that people can do and what have you. And there's a lot more, at least that I can see, collaboration between, different folks. There's a lot more consultants in this space than I feel like have ever been trying to get that niche skill set of, whether it's AI or how to do a good RFP or how to maximize your MSP or fix your costs. Like there's just so much more niche findings that people are doing these days. And so I think that has changed is it's evolving CW programs of like if you can do 80% of the work maybe as an internally ran program, but you only need to outsource 20%, you might be able to run it internally like an internal program.
Yeah.
But you might have, folks like myself that I have an MSP and I run through them, but I run it I would say at a little bit of a lower markup than I was ever seeing as well, because I also have been able to maximize some stuff internally so that I don't need to ask my MSP to do certain tasks.
Yeah.
So I think the evolution is some of that specific consultant work is like, I don't need my MSP to do certain things because I can go and phone a friend or, phone a consultant and pay a consultant a little bit different and then cut down on my costs from a day-to-day operation. So I think that's one benefit. The other part of your question was what? Tell me the last piece because I think I had something with that.
Yeah. Like, what was the biggest misconceptions leaders typically have about managing them effectively now?
Yeah, I think the programs have evolved so much in the sense that everyone has their own opinion, right? Like no program is run the same exact way. We all have different, thoughts on vendor neutrality or like vendor on premise or staffing partners talking to hiring managers directly, that it could evolve a program good or for worse potentially, by client. So I think not having so much ambiguity, but I guess I don't know if that's the right word, but ambiguity between different types of programs, I think stretches us as industry leaders because the moment I leave Lyft, right? And someone else comes in that has complete different opposite thoughts and opinions of me, could totally change the program 180, 360 even what I'm doing. But I think, that's the important part of each of the clients is making sure that they're hiring a CW leader that their beliefs are the beliefs of the company, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important aspect of, how it can evolve and how we change and making sure that one, as you're taking on any new position, you're taking it on with understanding like the full growth of what the company you're joining is requesting. Because you could come in and say, no, like you have to have a VMS, or no, we absolutely need an MSP, or we should switch a VMS system. But if you don't have that clear vision with the company that you're working for and like are on the same page, it can go bad really fast.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense because I know, like, even for years, like now transitioning to this next question, like we've seen that a lot of these, contingent workforce programs were very compliance driven, right? It focused heavily on a lot of cost control and risk mitigation and all the things, right? But now, like you're saying, when new people come in, it's like everyone does it different. There's a lot of agility now as we're hearing more about a little bit like that workforce strategy and total talent integration. So, where do you think most organizations actually sit on that maturity curve? And what's preventing them from evolving faster? Especially like how you mentioned in our previous question now, like If someone comes in, it could completely change.
Yeah. I don't think any program's ever perfect or can ever be perfect. Like there's always things that could be better within any program, which is a benefit to all of us as CW program leaders that our jobs so far don't think can be taken away from AI because there's just too much change that always happens. There's always an issue that needs to still be figured out and get solved. I think a lot of companies think that their programs are in a better place than they actually are. One of the big selling points for this role was like, it's a well-oiled machine. Everything's perfect. It runs smoothly. I'm like, well, I got in here and I thought the exact opposite,
Yeah.
right? Like like this needed to get fixed. Takes way too long. This is extremely manual. And so I think, just making sure that as program leaders, we come in and we really set the baseline to our internal teams, our executive teams is really important. It's a battle that I play every day, even here at Lyft, is just education, internally about a program and where it can be if you give me the reins to do so. I'm pretty lucky in the fact that I am not given a lot of direction, which I think is a good thing. I can do what I think is best for the program. But I think there's in some of my friends or colleagues in the space, they don't get that same buy-in of like, you can go and do this. Like, no, you absolutely can't go and do that. And so I think it just depends, right? What your company's dynamics are probably internally, but that's hopefully it's for the good for the person that's in that role, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that we've talked a lot about, the learning and not just formal education, right? But ongoing development in our careers. So, why do you believe this continuous learning is a differentiator in today's workforce ecosystem?
Yeah. Well, I think I had talked to you about this with you previously. Is in high school, I had a teacher,
Yeah.
Mr. Runyon, and he taught what God I don't even remember the thing. I think I told you the same thing. I was like, I don't remember. It's like biology or something that I don't care for.
Yeah.
But he taught me other skills. He was such a stringent teacher about process and following directions to like the specifics of you're graded on a paper. Like we'd be doing some type of activity in the class, doing something, but about half of the grade was, did you put your name in the top right corner correctly? Did you do it in cursive or in regular like writing? Did
Yeah.
you put the date, with the month spell out or, with April, 4/9 as the date. And those skills, it was so funny because I got to a role back in the day at Apple, and the Apple like procurement manager that I had to work for was the exact same way. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I've learned this. Just listen very carefully and follow directions. If they
Yeah.
ask you to do something, do it the way they want you to do it." And it's so funny. So I think of that like now, like when I go and ask my team to do something, I have to be very specific with what I'm asking for to give them those skills to be better on for later or to make them think for it for themselves. I'm not teaching them, how to talk to a manager and get them to say yes to a candidate, that's been
Yeah.
interviewing. I'm teaching them like, how do you make sure that you have a good process that you've taught the manager so that once the manager has the decision in their hands, they can make it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's so funny just the evolution of, learning and the skills that you're brought with and upbringing provides you that you bring into the work life is quite hilarious in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree because I was actually talking about this earlier on another podcast that I did, and we were saying like it's so crazy because we would look at that and be like, "Oh my gosh, like that teacher is being so nitpicky, like such a pain. Like, oh my gosh, like why is he taking off these points for not putting in the corner?" And it's like a lot of those skills are very transferable into our day-to-day lives from a business standpoint, from a professional standpoint. And you would never even think that until you finally like go through it and you reflect on it and become this leader that you are today, you're like, "He did teach me something. Wow."
Yeah. Or I also think there's another example is like when we were younger, like we would have to go and sit like and write a 5 paragraph, you had the intro,
Yeah,
the middle and the conclusion. It's like, well, now you have AI, it's gonna pop it all right out for you, right? Like, why do I even need that skill? But it's still a process, right? Like at the end of the day, like that was a process to write a document. So, now I'm gonna use that to go look at whatever AI spits out for my process and making sure that you got an intro, a middle, and a conclusion, right? But all the intricacies in that aren't necessarily necessary anymore.
yeah, that's true. And I think, looking ahead, what shift do you think will most impact the contingent workforce programs in the next few years? And how should leaders start preparing now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know. AI scares the living crap out of me, to be honest. But I think just being ready for change and being open to change, being open to conversation, being open to learning is going to be really important for folks. I will tell you, I don't want to go back to school and get a master's or, you know, do anything that has to do with taking a quiz or doing something. I think you were telling me that you were like in your finals just not that long ago. Like, God, that sounds absolutely horrible.
Yeah, literally.
But I like need to learn skills. So how am I gonna learn those skills, right? So for by me, it's probably having conversations with the people that learned those skills already and went to those schools and colleges, and then I'll just like have the conversation learning that I want to do. But I think it's gonna be really interesting to see the people that think that what has happened and how it's happened and how it's been done in the past, it's not gonna necessarily be the same with all of the evolution of AI. And so really being open to learning and having conversation and helping others learn it because it's not something easy. Like my dad is never going to use AI. Like there's just no chance. He can't even take a picture on his phone. But like, you know, how are some of the gaps between roles going to change, right?
Yeah.
Another example that someone gave me recently about it was engineers. So you have everyone that's like writing code. Well, they're not going to need to learn. They might need to learn to write code, but they're not going to write code for very long because they're just going to go to Claude or wherever and do the code.
Yeah.
You actually need the testers that are actually going to go and look at the code to see if if like where within the code is there errors. But how do you teach that to somebody that didn't ever write code? That's
Yeah.
a hard skill to learn, and so, like, I mean, that's just an example that I got recently from an engineering manager, but I'm like, "God," I mean, it's the same thing, like, if we don't need to we eventually don't need to, as recruiters, talk to a candidate because we can do it all through AI and get all the information we need to make the best choice, which I'm not saying we're doing that anytime soon, but let's just say we are. Well, then how do you teach somebody to be a good program manager or a good account manager because they've never actually had to recruit ever,
Yeah.
right? Like, in
Like,
some way.
have those basic skills.
Yeah, the basic skills. So it's like some of that stuff is gonna be very interesting to see how we evolve over the next few years in our space. But at the end of the day, I mean, we're helping somebody get a job, so how do we give them those tools and skills to be good at their job?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like now, because, I started off in the staffing space, but from a marketing perspective, I grew up around it my whole life. So when I see all these things, even from when I started not too long ago, right? Because I'm still very early on in my career. I remember, AI wasn't even that big of a thing just a few years ago. And now we have, people creating job descriptions and having the resumes get scanned through AI or even building all of these agents to kind of be on the phone and help the recruiters or help the hiring managers. So, like, if they didn't know, like you're saying, how to do like the core basics of recruiting, like how can you actually go to a AI agent to put the prompts in or to read it in a way that you got to double check it, of course. You can't just like throw it in. So it's crazy how quickly it has evolved as well, and I feel like it all kinda ties back into, like, yeah, that continuous learning loop, but understanding, like, the core basics from those who already have that experience is what's gonna make it a lot easier to, like, pivot in this
Yeah.
new era that we're
Yeah.
in.
I mean, you think of someone coming out of college, if they go straight to the staffing world, they're gonna be a recruiter, account manager. Like, the way of learning is, like, talking to people, and then you find out you learn about the engineering skill set or
Yeah,
whatever it is, like, you could have been a comms major, and then you're gonna supposed to go talk to an engineer that's, all about whatever, front end, back end, blah, blah,
yeah,
blah. I mean,
all
I still don't even know, right? And, like
I know,
but
I'm
it's like but at the end of the day, it's like, okay, you just need to understand the questions to ask to find out if they know what they're talking about.
yeah,
That's the
exactly. It's the people skills aspect, those soft skills aspect, honestly, that like, that's another thing in college now and, like, even the master's programs. When I was in these programs, I'm like, a lot of these people, like, you can tell they are not working yet. So, like, getting into it, like, relying on AI is obviously not the way to go, and that's what's being taught right now. So it's like, okay, yes, they're pushing for, like, be that AI person, be the one that's gonna implement it, but at the end of the day, like, you also have to have those people skills, the soft skills to be able to, like you said, ask the right questions.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to see how like an introvert extrovert
Yeah.
10 years like operates like I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how that changes.
Yeah, that's really funny. And as we head into our last question here, I wanted to ask some advice for the next gen. So, for professionals who are entering, let's say, this contingent workforce industry, especially those who want to grow into like those advisory or strategic roles, what advice would you give them about building credibility and influence?
Yeah. I mean, you have to know your things, right? You have to know all the things. So how are you going to learn all those things? Whether it be through asking your chat GBT all the questions
Yep.
and learning that way or going and having physical conversations like I do. I think it's important to just always be curious, always be interested and intrigued. Or if you don't know what something means, ask, not be afraid to ask. I think that's going to be the big differentiator. And it's going to be interesting too for even like again those young folks coming out of college like you don't know what you want to do, when you come out of college sometimes. Like you might have an idea that you're going to go do this thing and then 3, 4, 5 years later you change career paths. I think I've seen something where like someone changes the career path like 5 times in their life like in their lifehood.
Yeah.
But like, I think just making sure that, like, when you're in something, like, if you're gonna go into staffing, go all in. Ask all the questions, try to learn as much as you humanly can, and if you decide that it's not for you, then don't just sit there and keep doing it, right? Like, change your lane, if you will. But I think it's important to just always ask questions, be curious, and if not, like, you're really not gonna go anywhere because everyone else is gonna be going and asking those questions to ChatGPT and Claude and wherever else, and they're gonna be learning if you're just sitting there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one thing too that the next generation, they kind of like people that I've even know just firsthand experiences, like you said, you have to be fully immersed in the industry that you're working in to really figure out if this is what you want to do, this is what you want to stay in. Like, I want to grow in this path, but like not approach it in this surface level, I guess, approach, right? Because, like, how do you know if you really like something? You're not asking those questions or really trying to get with people that have those experiences and seeing if that's something that you like. Because you never know. Even if you fully immerse yourself, you're like, you know what? I kind of want to change this. You still learned something, and those skills are transferable to the next thing.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I still remember, like, the 10 steps that I learned at Target in retail life. They were really good at teaching individuals how to give, like, feedback to team members. I'm like, "Okay,
Yeah,
I learned that." It didn't have to do with putting, clothes on the floor or, getting sales at Target, but I learned, a different skill set that I use all the time today.
exactly. And I couldn't think of a better way to end off this episode. I wanted to thank you so much for joining us and for sharing so much wisdom today. So thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks so much.